The rifle blast echoed through the narrow canyon, just as Helena Garrett's mare stumbled, sending her tumbling into the rocky dirt of the California high desert. It was 1878, and the stagecoach from San Francisco to the small mining outpost of Calico had broken an axle 2 days back, forcing Helena and 3 other passengers to continue on horseback, with whatever mounts the station master could spare. The others had taken the easier route through the valley, but Helena's impatience had driven her to attempt the mountain pass alone, a decision she now regretted, as shadows lengthened across the barren slopes and the distant rumble of thunder rolled through the peaks above. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering as another shot ricocheted off the rocks to her left. Her mare had bolted, taking with it her meager supplies and the small pistol she had purchased in Sacramento. Helena's traveling dress was already torn at the hem, dust coating the dark blue fabric as she pressed herself against the canyon wall, trying to make sense of where the shots were coming from. "Nice and easy, miss," a rough voice called from somewhere above. "That locket around your neck and whatever coin you got, and we will let you walk on out of here." Helena's hand instinctively went to her throat, where her mother's silver locket rested against her collarbone. It was the only thing of value she owned, the only thing she had left of her family back in Boston. Her father had died of consumption 3 years ago. Her mother had followed 6 months later, and Helena's uncle had wasted no time selling the house and informing his niece that she was now on her own. The teaching position in Calico was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to build something of her own in this wild, untamed country. "I do not have any money," Helena called back, hating how her voice shook. "Please just let me pass." Laughter echoed off the rocks. "Then the locket will do just fine." Thunder rumbled again, closer now, and Helena felt the first drops of rain on her face. The storm was moving fast, the way they did in these mountains, turning the sky from pale blue to angry gray in minutes. She had read about flash floods in the canyons, about how quickly the dry washes could become raging torrents. A third shot kicked up dust near her feet, and Helena made a decision. She ran. The canyon twisted and turned, narrowing until she could barely fit between the walls, her skirts catching on sharp rocks and thorny brush. Behind her, she could hear the bandits shouting, their boots scraping on stone as they pursued. The rain began in earnest, fat drops that quickly became a downpour, and Helena's hair came loose from its pins, dark strands plastering to her face and obscuring her vision. She rounded a sharp bend and nearly collided with a wall of solid muscle. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and Helena found herself staring up at the broadest chest she had ever seen, covered in worn buckskin that darkened quickly in the rain. Her gaze traveled upward, taking in shoulders that seemed wide enough to block out the sky, a thick neck, and finally a face that made her breath catch for entirely different reasons than fear. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with long dark hair that fell past his shoulders in rain-soaked waves. His jaw was strong and square, covered in several days' worth of beard growth, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and intense as they assessed her with a single sweeping glance. His arms, where they gripped her shoulders, were corded with muscle, his hands large and calloused. "Please," Helena gasped. "There are men, they are shooting at me, they want to rob me." The mountain man's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold and dangerous. He moved her gently but firmly behind him, his body creating a barrier between Helena and the direction she had come from. With his other hand, he reached for the rifle slung across his back, a well-maintained weapon that looked like an extension of his body as he brought it up smoothly. 3 men came around the bend, their own weapons drawn, but they stopped short when they saw the figure blocking their way. "Dunstan Garrett," one of them said, and Helena heard the fear in his voice. "We did not know she was yours." "She is not mine," Dunstan said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Helena's chest even standing behind him. "But she is under my protection now. Turn around and ride back the way you came." The bandits exchanged glances, and for a moment, Helena thought they might actually be stupid enough to try their luck. But then the one who had spoken nodded slowly and lowered his weapon. "No trouble from us, Dunstan. We will just be on our way." They backed away slowly, then turned and disappeared around the bend. Helena waited until their footsteps faded before she allowed herself to breathe again. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that made her jump. She had never liked storms. As a child in Boston, she would hide under her bed during thunderstorms, curled into a ball with her hands over her ears, trying to block out the sound of the thunder and the flash of lightning through her window. Her parents had never understood, had told her she was being silly, that it was just weather. But the fear had never left her, had followed her even into adulthood, a secret shame she carried. Another boom of thunder, closer still, and Helena felt her knees begin to shake. Dunstan turned to look at her, and she saw his expression soften slightly as he took in her pale face and trembling hands. "There is a cave not far from here," he said. "We need to get out of this rain before the wash floods." Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the canyon in stark white light, and she flinched hard enough that she stumbled. Immediately, Dunstan's hand was on her elbow, steadying her. "Can you walk?" "Yes," Helena managed, though her legs felt like water. He kept his hand on her arm as he led her back the way he had come, his stride long but measured to match her pace. The rain made the rocks slippery, and twice Helena's feet skidded, but each time Dunstan's grip tightened, keeping her upright. His strength was astonishing, the way he moved through the storm as if the wind and rain were nothing more than minor inconveniences. The cave entrance was barely visible, a dark opening in the canyon wall that Dunstan had to duck to enter. Inside, it opened up into a space perhaps 10 feet across and twice that deep, with a ceiling high enough for even Dunstan to stand upright. The floor was dry, scattered with what looked like the remains of old fires, and there was a pile of firewood stacked neatly against one wall. "You stay here often?" Helena asked, trying to keep her voice steady as thunder rolled outside. "Sometimes," Dunstan said. He was already moving with practiced efficiency, building a fire in the stone ring at the center of the cave. "I trap up in these mountains. This is one of my camps." Helena wrapped her arms around herself, her wet dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. She was shivering now, whether from cold or fear or both, she could not say. Dunstan struck sparks into the kindling, and within moments, flames began to lick up through the wood. The warmth was immediate and welcome. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Dunstan said, not looking at her. He moved to a corner of the cave and pulled out what looked like a bedroll and a spare shirt. "Put this on. I will turn my back." Helena took the shirt with numb fingers. It was made of soft flannel, worn but clean, and it would swallow her whole. But it was dry, and right now that was all that mattered. She waited until Dunstan turned away, facing the cave entrance with his broad back to her, before she began the fumbling process of unfastening the buttons of her dress. Her fingers were clumsy with cold, and the wet fabric clung stubbornly. Outside, the storm raged, lightning illuminating the cave entrance in rapid flashes, thunder following so close that it felt like the mountain itself was shaking. Helena bit her lip, trying to focus on the buttons, but her hands were shaking too badly. "I cannot," she whispered, frustration and fear making her eyes burn with tears. "I cannot get the buttons." Dunstan hesitated, then slowly turned around. His eyes met hers and she saw nothing but concern in his gaze. "I can help," he said quietly, "if you will let me." Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. He crossed the cave in 2 strides and knelt in front of her, bringing himself closer to her height. His fingers, so large and rough, moved with surprising gentleness as he worked the tiny buttons of her dress. His eyes focused on his task rather than on her. Helena found herself studying his face in the firelight, the strong lines of his features, the way his wet hair dripped onto his shoulders. "Why did those men fear you?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the intimacy of the moment, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. Dunstan's jaw tightened. "I have a reputation in these mountains. People know I do not tolerate certain behaviors." "What kind of behaviors?" "Hurting people who cannot defend themselves." He finished with the last button and stood, turning his back again. "Get changed. You will catch your death." Helena shed the wet dress quickly, her chemise and petticoats following. She pulled on Dunstan's shirt, which fell to her knees like a dress, the sleeves hanging well past her hands. It smelled like pine and wood smoke and something indefinably masculine. She gathered her wet clothes and spread them near the fire to dry. "I am decent," she said. Dunstan turned, and something flickered in his eyes as he looked at her standing there in his shirt, her long dark hair hanging in wet tangles past her shoulders. But he said nothing, just removed his own soaked buckskin shirt, wringing it out before hanging it on a rock near the fire. Helena tried not to stare, but it was impossible. His torso was a map of muscle and old scars, his chest broad and powerful, his arms thick with strength. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and economy of motion. When he caught her looking, she quickly averted her eyes, feeling heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. Thunder boomed again, and Helena could not suppress the small sound of fear that escaped her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself, squeezing her eyes shut as lightning flashed. "You are afraid of storms," Dunstan observed. It was not a question. "Yes," Helena admitted, her voice small. "I always have been. It is foolish, I know. It is not foolish to be afraid." Another crack of thunder, so loud that Helena felt it in her bones. Before she could think about what she was doing, she had moved closer to Dunstan, seeking the shelter of his presence without conscious thought. He went very still, and for a moment she thought he might pull away. But then his arm came around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. "Come here," he said softly. Helena let him guide her down to sit on the bedroll he had spread near the fire. He sat beside her, his back against the cave wall, and then did something she had not expected. He pulled her close, settling her against his chest with her head tucked under his chin, his strong arms wrapped around her like a shield. "I have got you," he said, his voice rumbling through his chest into her ear. "The storm cannot hurt you here." Helena felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for as long as she could remember. No one had ever held her like this. Not when she was a child hiding under her bed, not when she was a young woman trying to be brave in a world that had taken everything from her. She had always faced her fears alone, had always been told to be strong, to not be so silly to grow up. But Dunstan held her like her fear mattered, like she mattered, and Helena felt tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not usually cry." "Cry if you need to," Dunstan said. His hand came up to stroke her damp hair, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "There is no shame in it." The storm raged outside, but Helena barely heard it anymore. Wrapped in Dunstan's arms, his body solid and warm against hers, his heartbeat steady under her ear, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt safe. They sat like that for a long time, until Helena's tears dried and her breathing evened out. Dunstan did not speak, did not ask her questions or demand explanations. He just held her, his presence a quiet comfort that needed no words. "Thank you," Helena finally said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You saved my life today, and not just from those men." "What is your name?" Dunstan asked. "Helena Garrett. I am going to Calico to be a teacher." Something changed in Dunstan's posture. "Garrett?" "Yes." "Why?" "That is my name too, Dunstan Garrett." Helena pulled back slightly to look up at him. "We share a surname. What a strange coincidence." "Maybe," Dunstan said, but there was something in his eyes she could not read. "Or maybe it is fate." Helena felt her breath catch. In the firelight, with his wet hair falling around his face and his storm-gray eyes fixed on hers, Dunstan was the most beautiful man she had ever seen. And the way he was looking at her, with such intensity and something that might have been longing, made her heart race in her chest. "I should tell you something," Dunstan said slowly. "I do not spend much time in towns. I prefer the mountains, the quiet. People make me uncomfortable." "You seem comfortable now," Helena observed. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You are different." "How? I do not know yet." "But you are." Outside, the thunder was moving away, the gaps between lightning and sound growing longer. The worst of the storm had passed, but the rain continued, a steady drumming that would likely last through the night. Helena knew they would be spending the night in this cave, knew that by all the rules of proper society, her reputation would be ruined. But she found she did not care. What did reputation matter out here in the wild, where survival was what counted? "You should sleep," Dunstan said. "It has been a long day. What about you?" "I will keep watch." Helena wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her, the warmth of the fire and the safety of Dunstan's presence making her eyelids heavy. She settled back against his chest, and his arms tightened around her. "I will be here," he promised. "All night. You are safe." Helena believed him. She fell asleep listening to his heartbeat, held close in the arms of a mountain man she had known for only a few hours but who already felt like home. She woke to pale morning light filtering into the cave and the smell of coffee brewing over the fire. For a moment, she was disoriented, not sure where she was or why she was wearing a shirt that came down to her knees. Then memory returned, and she sat up quickly, looking around for Dunstan. He was crouched by the fire, feeding it carefully, his movements economical and practiced. He had put his shirt back on, though it was still damp, and his long hair was tied back at his neck. When he heard her stir, he glanced over his shoulder. "Good morning," he said. "Your clothes are dry." Helena looked and saw that he was right. Her dress and undergarments were neatly folded on a rock near the fire, completely dry. She felt a blush creep up her neck at the thought of Dunstan handling her intimate clothing, but he seemed completely unbothered. "I will step outside while you dress," he said, already moving toward the entrance. "There is coffee when you are ready." Helena changed quickly, grateful to be back in her own clothes even if they were wrinkled and slightly stiff from drying. She tried to do something with her hair, braiding it into a simple plait that hung down her back. When she stepped out of the cave, she found Dunstan standing at the edge of the canyon, looking out over the valley below. The morning was clear and bright, the storm having washed the sky clean. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from what must be Calico, the mining town that was to be her new home. It looked small from this height, barely a handful of buildings clustered around the base of the mountains. "It is not much to look at," Dunstan said. "Calico. But the people are decent enough. They need a teacher badly. The last one left 6 months ago when the school board could not pay her on time. How do you know that? Helena asked. I go into town sometimes for supplies. People talk. Helena moved to stand beside him, careful to keep a respectable distance even though part of her wanted to lean into his side the way she had last night. In the light of day, with the fear gone, she felt awkward about how she had clung to him, how she had let him hold her like that. About last night, she began, but Dunstan cut her off. You do not need to apologize. I was not going to apologize. I was going to say thank you. Again. He looked at her then, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that made him seem younger than she had first thought. He could not be much older than 30, she realized, though his weathered skin and serious demeanor had made her think him older. I liked holding you, he said quietly. I liked being able to help. Helena's heart skipped. I liked being held. They stood there in silence for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Dunstan cleared his throat and turned back toward the cave. We should get you to Calico, he said. I will walk you down. It is not safe to go alone, and your horse is probably halfway to Nevada by now. Helena followed him back to the cave, where he efficiently packed up his few belongings and kicked dirt over the fire. He shouldered his bedroll and rifle with ease, then looked at her expectantly. Ready, as I will ever be. The walk down the mountain took most of the morning. Dunstan set a steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He pointed out tracks in the mud from the rain, telling her which animals had passed this way and how recently. He showed her which plants were safe to eat and which would make her sick. He spoke more than Helena had expected, his voice low and calm, and she found herself fascinated by the wealth of knowledge he carried about this wild country. Where did you learn all this? She asked as they stopped to rest near a small spring. My father, Dunstan said. He filled his canteen from the spring, then offered it to Helena. He was a trapper too, brought me up here when I was just a boy, taught me everything he knew. Is he still alive? No, he died 5 years ago, caught his leg in one of his own traps, got infected before he could get help. Dunstan's expression was carefully neutral. That is the danger of this life. You are on your own most of the time. If something goes wrong, there is no one to help. That sounds lonely, Helena said softly. It is, but it is also free. He took the canteen back from her and capped it. No one telling you what to do, where to go, how to live, just you and the mountain. Do you ever wish for something different? Dunstan was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted. Especially lately, I am getting older and the winters are getting harder. I think about what it might be like to have a home, a real home, someone to come back to. Helena felt something twist in her chest. That sounds nice. What about you? What made a Boston lady come all the way out to California to teach? How did you know I was from Boston? Your accent. And the way you dress. He gestured at her traveling dress, which had been fine and fashionable 3 months ago but was now dusty and worn. You are educated, refined. This is not the kind of place people like you usually end up. Helena bristled slightly at the implication. People like me. I did not mean it as an insult, Dunstan said. Just an observation. She sighed, letting her irritation fade. You are right, though. This was not my first choice. It was my only choice. My parents died and I had no money and no prospects. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Calico, I applied. They accepted me sight unseen, probably because no one else wanted the position. She looked out at the rugged landscape around them. I suppose we both ended up here because we had nowhere else to go. Maybe, Dunstan said. Or maybe we were supposed to end up here, together. Helena looked at him sharply, but his expression was serious, no trace of teasing. You believe in fate. I believe in purpose. I think things happen for a reason, even if we do not understand it at the time. He stood and held out his hand to help her up. Come on, we should keep moving. Helena took his hand, feeling the rough calluses against her palm, the strength in his fingers. When she was on her feet, he held on for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that felt almost tender. Then he released her and turned to lead the way down the trail. They reached Calico just after noon. The town was even smaller than it had looked from above, just a main street lined with a handful of buildings. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a livery stable, and a small church with a schoolhouse attached. The buildings were rough wood, unpainted and weathered, and the street was churned mud from the previous night's rain. A few people were moving about, pausing to stare as Dunstan and Helena walked into town. Helena was acutely aware of how she must look, her dress stained and wrinkled, her hair in a simple braid, walking beside a mountain man who looked like he could tear down buildings with his bare hands. "The schoolhouse is there," Dunstan said, nodding toward the church. "The teachers' quarters are attached to the back. It is not much, but it is yours." "Will you come with me?" Helena asked, suddenly not wanting to face this alone. Dunstan hesitated, then nodded. "If you want me to." They walked together to the schoolhouse, their boots squelching in the mud. The door was unlocked, and inside was a single room with a dozen rough-hewn desks, a blackboard on one wall, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. It smelled like dust and disuse, but it was clean enough. The teachers' quarters were through a door at the back. A tiny room with a narrow bed, a small table and chair, a washstand, and a window that looked out at the mountains. It was sparse and plain, but it was more than Helena had expected. "It is perfect," she said, meaning it. "It is mine." Dunstan stood in the doorway, too large for the small space. "You will be safe here. The town is small, but the people are good. If you need anything, you can go to the general store. Tell them I sent you and they will help you get started. You know them. I trade with them sometimes." Furs for supplies. He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I should go. I have traps to check." Helena felt a sharp pang of disappointment. She did not want him to leave, did not want to face this new life alone. But she had no right to ask him to stay, no claim on him beyond the kindness he had shown her. "Thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "for everything. I would not have made it here without you." "You would have," Dunstan said. "You are stronger than you think." He turned to leave, and Helena felt something like panic rise in her chest. "Will I see you again?" Dunstan looked back at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes," he said. "I will come back, I promise." Then he was gone, his tall form disappearing through the schoolhouse and out into the street. Helena stood at the window and watched him walk away, his long stride taking him quickly to the edge of town and then up into the foothills. She watched until he was just a speck against the mountainside, and then even that disappeared. Only then did she realize she had never asked him when he would return. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Helena met with the school board, a group of 3 minors who seemed surprised and pleased that she had actually shown up. They gave her a small advance on her salary and helped her purchase basic supplies from the general store. The storekeeper, a portly man named Clarence, asked after Dunstan and seemed satisfied when Helena explained that the mountain man had helped her reach town safely. "Good man, that Dunstan," Clarence said, wrapping her purchases in brown paper. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he has helped more than one person in these mountains. There was a little girl got lost last spring, wandered off from a wagon train. Dunstan found her and brought her back safe. Would not even take a reward." Helena absorbed this information, filing it away with everything else she was learning about the man who had held her through a thunderstorm. She cleaned the schoolhouse thoroughly, arranged the desks, and prepared lessons for the dozen students she was told to expect. She met her neighbors, mostly miners and their families, who were polite but reserved. She was an outsider, and it would take time to earn their trust. At night, alone in her small room, Helena lay awake and listened to the sounds of the town settling. She thought about Dunstan up in his mountains, wondered if he was thinking about her too. She touched the silver locket at her throat, the one the bandits had wanted to steal, and felt grateful that she had not lost it. It was the only piece of her past she had left. Everything else was here, in this small town, in this new life. A week after her arrival, a storm rolled in. Helena was in the schoolhouse, organizing books that had been donated by various families, when she heard the first rumble of thunder. Her hands immediately began to shake, her heart rate picking up. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was safe inside, that there was nothing to fear. But when lightning flashed and thunder cracked directly overhead, she found herself crouching beside one of the desks, her arms wrapped around her knees. She did not know how long she stayed like that, trying to breathe through the fear, wishing desperately that she was back in that cave with Dunstan's arms around her. The door to the schoolhouse opened, and she looked up, half expecting to see one of the townspeople checking on her. Instead, she saw Dunstan. He was soaked from the rain, his long hair plastered to his head and shoulders, water dripping from his buckskin jacket. His eyes found her immediately, and something like relief crossed his face. "I thought you might be scared," he said simply. Helena felt tears spring to her eyes. He had come. He had somehow known she would need him, and he had come down from his mountain in the middle of a storm to be with her. "I am," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I am so scared." Dunstan crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her up from the floor and into his arms. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. Helena pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, let herself be weak, let herself be held. "I've got you," Dunstan murmured against her hair. "I am here." Thunder boomed again, and Helena felt Dunstan's arms tighten around her, shielding her from the sound. He walked them backward to the teacher's desk and sat down on it, pulling Helena between his legs and holding her close. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, could feel the heat of his body through his wet clothes. "Tell me about Boston," he said, his voice low and soothing. "Tell me what it was like." Helena understood what he was doing, trying to distract her from the storm, and she was grateful. She told him about her childhood home, about the narrow streets and brick buildings, about the harbor where ships came in from all over the world. She told him about her father's bookshop, about the way her mother would sing while she cooked, about winters so cold that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Dunstan listened, asking questions occasionally, keeping her talking. And slowly, without realizing it, Helena's fear began to fade. The thunder became background noise, the lightning just flashes at the edge of her vision. What mattered was Dunstan's presence, his solidity, the way he held her like she was something precious. When the storm finally passed and the rain softened to a gentle patter, Helena pulled back slightly to look up at Dunstan's face. His gray eyes were warm in the dim light filtering through the windows. "You came back," she said softly. "I told you I would. I thought it would be longer. I thought you had traps to check. I did, I checked them, then I came back." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "I could not stop thinking about you, Helena, about holding you in the cave, about how right it felt." Helena's breath caught. "Dunstan, I know we barely know each other. I know you probably think I am crazy, but I feel something for you, something I have never felt before. And I think you feel it too." Helena knew she should deny it, should tell him that it was too fast, too sudden, that they needed to be practical. But she had spent her whole life being practical, being sensible, and where had it gotten her? Here, alone in a small mining town with nothing to her name but a silver locket and a room barely big enough to turn around in. "I feel it too," she whispered. Dunstan's eyes darkened, and for a moment Helena thought he might kiss her. But instead he pulled her close again, pressing his lips to her forehead in a gesture that felt like a promise. "I want to court you properly," he said, "if you will let me. I want to come down from the mountain and spend time with you. I want to know everything about you. I want to see if this feeling, this connection, is real." "I would like that," Helena said, her heart soaring. "I would like that very much." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet schoolhouse while the rain drummed on the roof. And Helena thought that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found where she belonged. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Helena had imagined. Dunstan came down from the mountains twice a week, always arriving in the late afternoon after she had finished teaching for the day. He would appear at the schoolhouse door, his arms full of whatever he had brought her: firewood for her stove, fresh meat from his hunting, wildflowers that grew high in the alpine meadows. They would walk together through the town and out into the foothills, talking about everything and nothing. Dunstan told her stories about his life in the mountains, about the bears and mountain lions he had encountered, about the harsh beauty of winter at high elevation. Helena told him about the books she loved, about her dreams of traveling to places she had only read about her students and the small joys of teaching. He was surprisingly easy to talk to once he got comfortable. His deep voice was soothing, and he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He listened when she spoke, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details she mentioned in passing. And he was protective without being overbearing, always positioning himself between her and any potential danger, always making sure she was warm enough, comfortable enough, happy. The townspeople noticed, of course. In a place as small as Calico, there were no secrets. Helena caught the miners watching them as they walked by, saw the women whispering to each other in the general store. But no one said anything unkind, and gradually, Helena realized that Dunstan was respected here. His reputation, whatever it was, had preceded him. 6 weeks after they met, Dunstan took her up into the mountains to see his cabin. It was a full day's hike from Calico, tucked into a sheltered valley with a stream running through it. The cabin itself was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and real glass windows that Dunstan admitted he had packed up the mountain piece by piece. "It is not much," he said as he showed her around, "but it is home." Helena looked around at the simple furniture he had built himself, the furs on the floor, the shelves lined with supplies. It was clean and organized, a testament to Dunstan's careful nature. Through the window she could see the mountains rising up on all sides, their peaks still capped with snow even though it was late summer. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "I can see why you love it here." Dunstan came to stand beside her at the window. "I do love it, but it is lonely." "I never minded the loneliness before, but now that I have met you, the silence feels different, emptier." Helena turned to look at him. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Helena Garrett." His voice was steady, sure. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you and I want to build a life with you." Helena felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you held me through the storm." Dunstan's face broke into a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his features from handsome to breathtaking. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Helena melted against him, her hands coming up to tangle in his long hair, and Dunstan groaned low in his throat as he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dunstan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a mountain man with a small cabin and a hard life, but I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I will keep you safe. I will hold you through every storm. I will give you everything I have." "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in the small church in Calico. Helena wore a simple dress she had purchased from the general store, and Dunstan wore clean buckskins and a new shirt. The preacher performed the ceremony, and the entire town turned out to witness it. Clarence from the general store stood as Dunstan's witness, and the school board chairman's wife stood for Helena. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dunstan kissed Helena with such tenderness that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. They signed the marriage certificate, officially becoming Mr. and Mrs. Dunstan Garrett, and Helena felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The town threw them a small celebration at the saloon, with food and music and dancing. Helena had never seen Dunstan so relaxed, so at ease with other people. He kept her close to his side all evening, his arm around her waist, his eyes constantly seeking her out as if to reassure himself that she was real. When the sun set and the party began to wind down, Dunstan leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Garrett?" Helena nodded, suddenly nervous. They had decided to spend their wedding night in Helena's small room at the schoolhouse, planning to move up to Dunstan's cabin in the mountains after the school term ended in a few months. It was a compromise, a way to blend their two lives together. The walk from the saloon to the schoolhouse was short, but Dunstan made it memorable. Halfway there, he simply swept Helena up into his arms and carried her the rest of the way, her laughter ringing out into the night. He kicked open the door to her room and set her gently on her feet beside the narrow bed. "Helena," he said, his voice rough, "if you are nervous, if you want to wait, we can. There is no rush." But Helena was not nervous. She had never been more certain of anything. She reached up and began unbuttoning Dunstan's shirt, her fingers steady. "I am not nervous," she said. "I am your wife, and I want this." Dunstan helped her with the rest of their clothing, his hands gentle but eager. And when he laid her down on the bed and covered her body with his, Helena felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. He was careful with her, attentive, making sure she was comfortable and ready. And when they finally came together, it was with a rightness that transcended the physical, a joining of souls as much as bodies. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Dunstan's strong arms wrapped around Helena, her head on his chest. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance and Helena felt Dunstan's arms tighten reflexively. "I am all right," she said softly. "With you here, I am always all right." "Good," Dunstan murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair, "because I am never letting you go." The months that followed were the happiest of Helena's life. She taught during the day, and Dunstan worked on expanding and improving his cabin, preparing it for both of them. He came down from the mountain 3 or 4 times a week now, often staying overnight in Helena's small room, holding her close through the dark hours. When winter came and the school term ended, Helena said goodbye to Calico and moved up to the mountain cabin with her husband. The journey took most of the day, and by the time they arrived, Helena was exhausted. But when Dunstan carried her over the threshold and set her down in front of the fireplace he had built up to roaring, she felt only joy. "Welcome home," he said, and Helena knew she was exactly where she belonged. That first winter was hard. The snow came early and heavy, trapping them in the cabin for days at a time. But Helena found she did not mind. She had brought books with her, and she spent the long evenings reading aloud to Dunstan while he worked on various projects, carving new spoons, repairing his traps, tanning hides. He was endlessly patient, teaching her how to cure meat, how to keep the fire going efficiently, how to identify the sounds of different animals moving around outside. And whenever a storm rolled through, Dunstan would set aside whatever he was doing and pull Helena into his arms. He held her through every thunderstorm, just as he had promised, his body a warm shield against her fears. And gradually, Helena found that the fear itself was lessening. With Dunstan beside her, the storms did not seem so terrifying anymore. One night in late February, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, Helena placed Dunstan's hand on her belly. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. Dunstan's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you certain?" "Yes. I have missed my courses twice now. And I have been feeling sick in the mornings." She looked up at him, trying to gauge his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Dunstan's voice was thick with emotion. "Helena, I am more than happy. I am honored. I am terrified. I am everything all at once." Helena laughed, relief flooding through her. "I am terrified too. I do not know the first thing about being a mother." "You will learn," Dunstan said, his hand moving gently over her still flat stomach. "We will learn together, and I promise you I will take care of both of you, always." The baby was born in early October, after a long labor that left Helena exhausted but triumphant. Dunstan had ridden down to Calico to fetch the midwife, a sturdy woman named Agnes, who had delivered half the babies in the mining camp. Agnes stayed with them for 3 days, helping Helena learn to feed the baby and care for him. They named him Daniel, after Dunstan's father. He had his father's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair, and from the moment Dunstan held him, Helena could see the fierce love in her husband's face. "He is perfect," Dunstan said, his voice full of wonder. "You are both perfect." Life settled into a new rhythm after Daniel's birth. Dunstan was attentive to both mother and baby, taking over most of the household chores so Helena could rest and recover. He would sit for hours with Daniel in his arms, talking to him in that low, soothing voice, telling him stories about the mountains and the animals that lived there. When spring came, Helena felt strong enough to help Dunstan with the trapping again. She would strap Daniel to her back in a carrier Dunstan had crafted, and they would walk the trap lines together as a family. Daniel seemed to thrive in the mountain air, growing quickly and developing a sunny disposition that reminded Helena of her own mother. 2 years later, they had a daughter. Margaret, named for Helena's mother, had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, but her father's strength. From the time she could walk, she was following Dunstan around the cabin, wanting to help with everything he did. And then, 3 years after Margaret, came another son. Thomas was the quietest of the 3 children, thoughtful and observant, with a love of books that Helena fostered by reading to him every night. The cabin had to be expanded twice to accommodate the growing family. Dunstan built an additional room for the children, with 3 small beds and a window that looked out at the mountains. He added a larger kitchen area for Helena and improved the root cellar for storing food. The cabin that had once been a lonely bachelor's retreat became a home filled with laughter and love. Helena had given up teaching formally, but she still taught every day, educating her own children with the same care and attention she had given to the students in Calico. Dunstan taught them about the wilderness, about tracking and hunting and surviving. Together, the children received an education that was both practical and academic, preparing them for whatever life they might choose. The years passed quickly. Daniel grew tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over much of the trapping and hunting. Margaret became skilled in both housekeeping and wilderness survival, equally comfortable stitching a quilt or tracking a deer. Thomas developed a talent for drawing, spending hours sketching the plants and animals around their home, creating a detailed record of the natural world they lived in. Through it all, through every season and every change, Dunstan and Helena's love only deepened. He still held her through every storm, still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And Helena still felt that catch in her heart every time she watched him with their children. Every time he smiled that rare, transforming smile that was only for her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dunstan took Helena back to the cave where they had spent their first night together. The children were old enough now to be left alone for a day, and Dunstan wanted to recreate that moment when everything had changed. They built a fire in the same stone ring, now overgrown with moss. They sat with their backs against the cave wall, Helena tucked into Dunstan's side exactly as she had been 20 years before. Outside, by pure coincidence, a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains. "You remember?" Dunstan asked softly. "Every moment," Helena said. "I was so scared, of the storm, of the future, of being alone, and then you were there, and suddenly I was not alone anymore." "You have never been alone since," Dunstan said, "and you never will be. I am yours, Helena, for the rest of my life and whatever comes after." "And I am yours," Helena whispered. She turned her face up to his and kissed him, tasting the salt of happy tears on both their lips. Thunder boomed outside, but Helena did not flinch. She had not been afraid of storms for years now, not since Dunstan had shown her that fear was something that could be shared, could be faced together. The storms still came, but they no longer had power over her. They stayed in the cave until the storm passed, holding each other and remembering. When they finally walked back to their cabin, hand in hand, they found their children waiting on the porch. Daniel had cooked dinner, Margaret had set the table, and Thomas had drawn a picture of the whole family to give to his parents. That night, after the children were asleep, Dunstan and Helena sat on the porch and looked out at the mountains bathed in moonlight. Helena rested her head on her husband's broad shoulder, feeling his arm come around her waist. "You ever regret it?" Dunstan asked. "Giving up teaching, living up here away from civilization?" "Never," Helena said firmly. "This is where I was meant to be, with you. This is home. I worried when we first married that I was taking you away from the life you deserved. That you would wake up one day and realize you had made a mistake." Helena turned to look at her husband, seeing the vulnerability in his storm-gray eyes. "Dunstan Garrett, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You taught me that I did not have to face my fears alone. You showed me what love really means. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. How could I ever regret that?" Dunstan pulled her closer, pressing his lips to her forehead. "I love you, Helena, more every day. And I love you." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast sky above the mountains. And Helena thought about the girl she had been 20 years ago, scared and alone, running from bandits in a canyon during a storm. That girl could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this deep and abiding love. But then Dunstan Garrett had appeared, like something out of a fairy tale, and everything had changed. He had held her through that first storm, and he had kept holding her through every storm since. He had given her safety when she needed it, strength when she faltered, and love beyond measure. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and fulfillment. Daniel eventually met a young woman from Calico, a miner's daughter with a bright smile and a strong spirit. They married and built their own cabin not far from Dunstan and Helena's, starting the next generation of the Garrett family in these mountains. Margaret fell in love with a doctor who had come to Calico to treat the miners. He was a kind man who admired Margaret's practical skills and independent spirit. They moved to Sacramento, where he opened a practice, but they visited every summer, bringing Helena and Dunstan's grandchildren to run wild in the mountains. Thomas, the quiet one, the dreamer, went to San Francisco to study art. His detailed sketches of mountain wildlife caught the attention of a publisher, and he ended up illustrating books about the natural world. But he always came home to the cabin, always brought his latest work to show his parents, always sought their approval and their love. Helena and Dunstan grew old together in their mountain home. Their hair turned gray, their faces lined with the years, but their love remained as strong as ever. Dunstan's body, so powerful in his youth, began to slow with age, but his arms were still strong enough to hold Helena. And Helena, who had been so afraid of storms as a young woman, now sat calmly through them, secure in the knowledge that her husband was beside her. On a crisp autumn morning in their 45th year of marriage, Dunstan woke with a strange pain in his chest. Helena wanted to ride for the doctor, but Dunstan stopped her, his hand gripping hers weakly. "No," he said. "This is how it ends, Helena. I can feel it." "No," Helena said, tears streaming down her face. "You cannot leave me. We have more years together. We have to have more time." "We had more time than most people ever get," Dunstan said, his voice soft. "We had 45 years of love and happiness. We raised 3 beautiful children. We built a life that mattered. That is more than I ever dreamed of having." "It is not enough," Helena sobbed. "It will never be enough." Dunstan lifted his hand to her face, wiping away her tears with his thumb just as he had done so many times before. "Helena Garrett, you are the love of my life. Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Holding you through that first storm showed me what I had been missing all those lonely years. You gave me everything." "And you gave me everything," Helena said, leaning into his touch. "You saved me, Dunstan. In every way a person can be saved." "Then we saved each other," Dunstan said. "And that is how it should be." He closed his eyes then, his breath becoming shallow. Helena climbed into bed beside him, curling into his side one last time, her head on his chest listening to the slowing beat of his heart. She felt his arm come around her, still protective even now, and she knew he was holding on for her. "I love you," she whispered. "I will always love you." "Always," Dunstan breathed, and then his heart stopped and he was gone. Helena held him for a long time, her tears soaking into his shirt, her body shaking with grief. But even in her sorrow, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for every moment they had shared, every storm he had held her through, every morning she had woken up in his arms. Gratitude for the life they had built together, for the children they had raised, for the love that had sustained them through decades. Their children came when Helena finally sent word. They buried Dunstan on the mountainside overlooking the valley, with a simple wooden marker that Daniel carved with his father's name and the words, "He held her through every storm." It was exactly what Helena wanted, a tribute to the man who had shown her what love really meant. Helena lived for another 10 years after Dunstan's death. She stayed in the cabin they had shared, surrounded by memories and the love that still seemed to echo in every corner. Her children visited often, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren to hear stories about the mountain man who had built this home, who had loved so fiercely and lived so fully. And when storms rolled through the mountains, Helena would sit in the rocking chair Dunstan had made for her and close her eyes. She could still feel his arms around her, could still hear his deep voice telling her she was safe. The fear that had plagued her youth was long gone. replaced by the memory of being held, of being loved, of being cherished. On a summer evening, with the sun setting golden over the mountains and a gentle rain pattering on the roof, Helena closed her eyes for the last time. Her grandchildren found her the next morning, peaceful in her chair, a small smile on her lined face, and they knew, somehow, that she had gone to be with Dunstan, that they were together again. They buried her beside her husband on the mountainside with a marker that matched his. Hers said, "She was never afraid again." Together, the markers told the story of a love that had conquered fear, that had built a legacy, that had lasted beyond death itself. The cabin remained in the Garrett family for generations. Each new occupant heard the story of Dunstan and Helena, of how they met during a storm and fell in love against all odds. The story became legend, passed down through the years, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that two people who were meant to be together would always find each other. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the mountains and thunder echoed off the peaks, it was said that you could still feel their presence in that cabin. The mountain man and his beloved wife, together forever, holding each other through every storm, just as they had promised. A love story written in the Wild West, as enduring as the mountains themselves, as constant as the passage of seasons, as deep and true as any love that ever existed. Their great-great-grandchildren still told the story, teaching it to their own children, making sure the legacy lived on. They spoke of how a scared woman from Boston and a lonely mountain man found each other in a canyon during a thunderstorm, and how that one moment of connection had changed everything. How she had never been held when she was scared before that night, but how the mountain man had held her through every thunderstorm after, for the rest of their lives. It was a story about courage and fear, about finding home in another person, about building a life from nothing but love and determination. It was the story of Dunstan and Helena Garrett, and it would live on as long as the mountains stood, a testament to the power of love to transform, to heal, and to endure through all the storms life could bring.